Good morning, Dog Nation. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. Are y'all ready? Because I get the sense this may be a little bit of a wild one here today as we recap, at least as much as we can. You know, a lot of this is going to fixate on a couple of big moments from Saturday's game. We'll try to touch on as many of the other things as we can. And honestly, as we get ready for another crazy one coming up this Saturday against Ole Miss, it's going to take us. Y'all, we're just going to be knee-deep in this for many, many days here. But is there anything more fun than talking about college football here on a Monday and talking about a 9th straight win for Georgia against Auburn? We are all over all of that today. The controversy from the Auburn side, the whining coming from the Auburn side, the celebration coming from the Georgia side, and in particular this. When we get a little deeper into this in a moment, we're going to talk about how that fateful moment right near halftime, I think it shows you what makes Georgia, Georgia, and why Auburn is Auburn. And buried deep within all the confusion and the chaos, the plan that Georgia puts forth to be at its best, to give itself every small opportunity to earn a win. And in some cases, the last couple of years, if we're being honest, pulling a win out of the jaws of defeat. That was on full display on Saturday because we all know it. Georgia did not play great, but they won the game. And boy, that's worth talking about here today. We'll do it. Jon Stinchcomb will help us. More importantly, we're glad to have you with us for it. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, viewed to be the best.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
What a Monday to be sitting in this chair doing this show, talking with all of you, and what a crazy game we saw on Saturday. Georgia beating Auburn for a 9th straight year. That is obviously the headline here. Auburn fans are beside themselves in anger. And as I always say, if they are this mad, then we must have done something right. If they're this upset, then the world must be as it's supposed to be here on this particular Monday. So here's how we're going to do it. We're going to start with, and I'm guessing you probably already know, controversial play, at least in the eyes of some, near the end of the first half. But because we like to go a level deeper, we're going to do that here today and dive beyond just the main talking points into what I think is really illustrative, what demonstrates what makes Georgia, Georgia, and Auburn, Auburn, all coming from the Jackson Arnold fumble at the goal line. Let me begin simply by saying the officials, of course, got it right. That when you look at the play, and our Cody Chaffetz had great video of this, you see C.J. Allen get the first punch. And at that point, the ball starts to become dislodged. By the time that Raylan Wilson gets his punch, and I say this with all due respect to Raylan Wilson's punch is really negligible to the fumble. Wilson aids Kyron Jones with the recovery, but the fumble is caused by the C.J. Allen punch. That by the time Jackson Arnold is going across the goal line, across the end zone, he's already lost control of the football. And as I said, we have good video of this. If you're watching on video, you see this now. And honestly, just because it's close, and no doubt, we're not liars here, it's a very close call, but just because it's close does not mean it's controversial. It is fairly obvious to me that that's what this was. And I will tell you this real quick. I think it's really interesting. You know, if you're about my age, you grew up hearing about the 1960 presidential election, where it was the first time a debate had been seen on TV, and folks who watched the debate on TV thought John F. Kennedy had won, and folks who listened on the radio thought Richard Nixon had won. Did you ever hear that story growing up? If you're about my age, I heard that a lot. I don't know if it's true or not, but it's just a thing we were told about, life when TV was first getting started. The point here is that I think there was a certain version of that that's also true with this particular game as well. As someone who was sitting in the press box when this happened, and there's screens everywhere, a lot of very interested parties in the room. Some of them are like me, probably Georgia fans. Some of them are Auburn fans, no doubt. Most of the people are just reporters there trying to do a job. Everybody wants to make sure they understand what's going on. And I can tell you that in the press box, as the replay is going on, as the discussion is ongoing, it was certainly not this thought that, oh my gosh, Auburn's getting jobbed, or oh my gosh, why are they even reviewing this? It's obviously a touchdown. No, there was plenty of discussion and debate about when the football started to become dislodged. And I will tell you that for me and all the people who were sitting around me in the press box on Saturday, when the replay came back and it was ruled to be officially an Auburn touchdown, that was not met with huge surprise from the people who were watching all the replays in the booth in the press box. I'm sure there were other people who felt differently, but the people sitting around me, it was not this, oh my gosh, can you believe they just stole this from Auburn? For people in the press box who were seeing all these reviews, that's not quite what it was. But it's important to note that while we were getting all of these reviews, we were not listening to the television broadcast in much the same way we're told way back in 1960, TV perhaps obscured who won the presidential debate. If you were alive, maybe you tell a different story, but that's the way we heard it growing up. I think for the folks who watched the TV broadcast, and more importantly, heard the TV broadcasters, I think all of a sudden they thought this was some huge miscarriage of justice, because the TV broadcast got very, very dramatic about all of this, very into their feelings about this particular call. Sean McDonough was the play-by-play broadcaster. Full disclosure, I like McDonough a lot. We've had him on the show before. I think he's a good broadcaster. I don't know this is one for his Hall of Fame reel, but nonetheless, McDonough, I think, shaped the opinion of millions of folks watching by just being beside himself by what he thought was this horrible miscarriage of justice that hurt Auburn in this moment. Let me let you hear it. You already know about this. Y'all have been telling me about it. I'm only playing back for you what you've already complained to me about. Here is McDonough and just the drama. Oh, my goodness. Take a listen to this.
The first review, the runner lost control of the ball prior to reaching the plane to goal line.
Oh, boy. I have no idea what they were looking at. I mean, all three of us thought that shot down the line where you can see the ball, especially when you sync it up from the other side with the top of his body, and he still has the ball. The hand bats it away, and from the other replay that we saw right down the line, the ball's across the line when the hand makes contact with the ball to punch it up.
So before I get into what McDonough says, can I just admit something to you? And I'll try to be as honest with you all as I can be. My faith is very important to me. I try to be a good Christian, not always successfully. And this is probably an example of that, in that when the referee comes back on the mic and basically acknowledges it is a fumble, I don't know. Can we do this? This is probably complicated, going to frustrate somebody, but can we just play the beginning part of that clip again where the referee says it's a fumble? I want you to listen to how loud the Auburn people boo about this. And this is where me being a bad guy comes in. I should not take such perverse pleasure in them being this mad. But as somebody who grew up like in pro wrestling and the bad guy says whatever and the crowd boos and it's always really funny, this is so funny to me how loudly how mad they are when the referee comes back and says, you know what, we looked at it, it actually is a fumble. Can we hear that part again? Can we do that one more time?
After further review, the runner lost control of the ball prior to reaching the plane to goal line.
And that's enough. We don't need to do more than that. Like, I wish I was a better person. Honestly, it'd be great. I'd be a good example for my kids, and I'd be a better man if I didn't take such joy in how mad they are about all of that. But the point is that McDonough's like, I don't have any idea what they're looking at. I don't have any idea. And in this case, he's literally true. McDonough, Greg McElroy, the color analyst, Matt Austin, the rules official, they all, I think, misunderstood the key component that in video you can plainly see that C.J. Allen gets the punch out. The ball is coming loose. And as Arnold is going across the goal line, he's already lost full, secure control of the football. And by the time Raylan Wilson completely dislodges it, he's already finishing a process that was already started by C.J. Allen. Arnold did not have control of the football. As I said before, it's a close call, but it's not a controversial decision. I would also further explain it this way, starting with the fact that a coaching point is for quarterback sneak, running backs, when you're down near the goal line, while yes, everybody fixates on the same thing of all you got to do is cross the plane. That's not quite true. It's not quite so simple. You don't just have to cross the plane. You have to cross the plane with the football secure in your hands. And any coach that's ever coached will tell running back, quarterback, if you are trying to extend the ball across the goal line, do not do a full extension unless it's fourth down, unless it's the final play, the game's on the line, because as you attempt to extend, which is not what happened here, I'm just saying it's a coaching point, as you attempt to extend, if you lose control while extending, that's going to be a fumble and it might be a touchback. We see the same thing in the NFL the last couple of weeks. Have you followed the story there of the premature celebrations where touchdowns have been taken off the board? If all you had to do was cross the plane, well, celebrating early actually wouldn't be that big of a deal because the ball still eventually gets across the goal line. No, the problem is when you go across the goal line, you don't have full control of the football. You have relinquished that control, and so therefore the touchdown doesn't count. It's the same thing here. Arnold has lost control of the ball. He no longer has firm possession. We'll get into a moment. People say you don't clap like this. Well, guess what? And I know if you're listening podcast, you don't see this. You don't hold a football like this, right? I mean, if you're trying to squeeze that thing when it's already slipping out, the fumble has already started. Therefore, you don't get to cross the plane and have that called a touchdown. I'll finish my explanation on this by making a pop cultural reference for a moment. A movie that I like from like, say, 10, 15 years ago. You ever see The Social Network? Jesse Eisenberg plays Facebook founder Mark Zuckerberg. The movie is about Zuckerberg's fight with the Winklevoss twins, in this case played by Armie Hammer, and it's the court proceedings that led to who really founded Facebook. And there is a moment in that movie that I think is perfect in comparison to what we're talking about here with Georgia and Auburn. The Eisenberg, as Zuckerberg, in the movie says to the Winklevoss twins, if you founded Facebook, then you would have founded Facebook. And that's simple and to the point, and the exact same thing is true here. If Jackson Arnold had scored a touchdown, then Jackson Arnold would have scored a touchdown. But the reason why everything that happened on Saturday occurred is because Arnold didn't score a touchdown. Walk with me through this just for a quick second. Ball is snapped. Arnold moves forward. stopped at or near the goal line, so much so, then you see this. You've seen this from the video we've played. You saw this from TV. The officials run in to see if he did score. Their hands don't go up because it's not obvious that he did. When they finally get to the scrum to look in there and see, well, did he cross the goal line? Guess what they realize? Oh, the football's not here. Kyron Jones has it. Therefore, Arnold fumbled. It's obvious that he fumbled because he doesn't have the football. So now you can't call anything but fumble because he doesn't have the football. It's obviously a fumble. The question is, when did the fumble occur? And that's what the process of replay is for. And when looking at the replay, they determine the fumble begins when C.J. Allen punches it out. Check the official stat sheet. Allen gets credit for forcing the fumble. He gets credit for the punch out. And that's the entire story. If Arnold had scored a touchdown, he would have scored a touchdown. He didn't score a touchdown. He fumbled. When did he fumble? Because that determines what the call is going to be. Oh, the Allen punch out. And frankly, for the millions of people who are influenced by just an error in judgment and an incorrect description by Sean McDonough and Greg McElroy and the rules official Matt Austin, it kind of ends up being, to me, just that simple. So if you're an Auburn fan, you tuned in for an apology today. You'll get none when it comes from us on that. As far as we're concerned, this play was adjudicated fair and square. But moving on, I think it also demonstrates in the aftermath of it, because even if it was a bad call, which it obviously wasn't, even if it was a bad call, there's still 30 minutes more of football to be played. And obviously we know that Georgia handled that 30 minutes far better than Auburn did. And ultimately, and I think even Auburn fans themselves will admit this is one of these things that one day when Auburn wants to fire Hugh Freeze, they're going to use this against Hugh Freeze, whereas in the immediate aftermath of this, they're selling a different story, but eventually they're going to change their tune. They'll use this as evidence against Freeze, and that's just the way it goes. But nonetheless, Georgia made much better use of its second half than Auburn made of its, and I think we can trace it all back to the Jackson-Arnold fumble as the reason why. In fact, our guy Jay Black had a great stat on this from our post-game show on Saturday, just how much the total yardage advantage completely changed from what had been a huge favor of Auburn to an imbalance in Georgia's direction after that particular fumble. And all of that, I think, is very easily explained by just how Auburn just fell apart. And obviously the coach sets the tone for the personality for the team. And in the immediate aftermath of the fumble, a minute later, Georgia kicks field goal, half comes to an end. Now Hugh Freeze, as the winning coach, has to be interviewed, or the leading coach, I should say, has to be interviewed going into the locker room. Freeze just cannot gain his composure. He is beside himself. He was completely unprofessional, but it helps explain everything that happens after that. This is Freeze from halftime after the Arnold fumble had occurred.
I have no clue. I think our kids have played really hard, really well. We should be up more. We dominated the first half.
What are you going to say to your team in the locker room after kind of a chaotic
keep
end?
playing, man. I mean, there's more stoppages, more. I mean, it's maybe the longest half of football ever. I don't know how many timeouts that Georgia got with all the stoppages, and don't have no clue how that doesn't break the plane. No clue. And we're due a break maybe one of these times.
So, once again, I wish I didn't take such perverse pleasure in Freeze being so mad. He does stop himself at the very beginning there where he's about to just lay into the officials. Then he pulls back and doesn't. So he at least has some modicum of control. But he is so obviously beside himself in anger right there. And whatever loss of control he's putting on display there, he takes the same thing with him into his halftime locker room. Of course he did, and his team then played that way the rest of the game. By the way, look at the number. Georgia, 238 yards after the goal line fumble. Auburn just 40 for the rest of the dadgum game. They only gained 40 yards, and you say, well, how could that be true? Listen to their coach at halftime. He's lost it. He's completely checked out of the game now, and the fact that his team also checked out becomes a lot easier to explain. Then conversely, on the Georgia side, well, they go to work. They get the field goal going at halftime, and apparently, according to Kirby Smart's own telling, they made a lot better use of their halftime and their opportunity for a reboot than Auburn made of its. This is what Kirby Smart said after the game.
I thought at halftime, the coaching staff did a great job allowing the kids to have some confidence. The drive before the half kept us alive, and I think we were the stronger team in the fourth quarter, and that's what we pride ourselves on. So really proud of these guys.
Stronger team in the fourth quarter, that's what we pride ourselves on. It's a game in which Georgia played terribly for the most part, but got better as the game went on and made the plays happen when they needed to. And beyond that, this is not just a story of, well, Auburn didn't react to the moment, all that's true. I think you also have to look a little deeper here and say, what did Georgia do to help create this moment? Because Georgia wasn't just the beneficiary of blind luck. Georgia worked to make that happen, had been working to make that happen. This is something that Kirby Smart's been talking about. The notion that, hey, if you can't make the tackle or if you can't make the big play, do something to dislodge the football. And Kirby Smart said that was their mindset. With the ball at the goal line, they still had a chance to do something, and that's the way that Georgia approached that moment. Here's Kirby Smart again.
Stopped us running the ball really in the first half, and frustrating, but the kids never quit. And that's never been more evident than a punch out on the goal line, which we practice all the time. And Raylan, CJ, whoever did it, it was an amazing play that they're not in until they're in. And that's our saying. They ain't in until they're in.
But here's the thing. Kirby's right. This is something they've been working on, and it's our propaganda is it's C.J. Allen that creates the punch out. The Auburn propaganda is it was Raylan Wilson, and that was already after he'd crossed the goal line. That's their propaganda. Our propaganda is it was C.J. Allen, which is, of course, what the officials correctly noted when looking at this via replay. But the point here is when Kirby says, hey, this is something we've been working on, that's not just lip service. That's not just something that Kirby Smart made up. I mean, go back a couple of Saturdays ago, Smart in his post-game press conference after Kentucky went into vivid detail about just how hard they had been working on that sort of thing. Here's Kirby Smart again.
Can't tell you how hard Schumann and defensive staff have worked. I mean, we sacrificed 10, 20, 30, like 30, 40 practice minutes, which are like golden nuggets. I mean, to y'all 30, 40 minutes is nothing, but 30, 40 minutes out of a week to nothing but attempts and strip outs and targeting balls and punching balls is really big. And I mean, I didn't see it, but it looks like he used one of the tools that we had to punch it.
You know who he's talking about right there? C.J. Allen. Who did he eat on Saturday? That's Georgia. And listen, you can get mad at Georgia for not being more explosive on offense or not getting stops in the first half on defense, and you should. And this week, I promise you, we will talk about it. I promise you we will. That's Georgia. We're going to spend 30, 40 minutes. We're going to teach C.J. Allen how to knock a football out. He'll do it against Kentucky. He'll come back and save the game by doing it against Auburn. That's about as much Georgia as you're ever going to get right there. We're going to spend 40 minutes working on something during practice, and then it's going to pay off for us in the next game and the game after that, and who knows how many more games. You gotta give them credit for that. You just absolutely do. And by the way, if anything, after the punch out, not only was it correctly ruled not an Auburn touchdown, if anything, we think it should have been a Georgia touchdown. Kyron Jones picked up the football. He ran to the end zone. He was never down, at least to my eyes. Kirby Smart also talked about that after the game too.
I never got an explanation. Of course, it took the longest I've ever seen. All I was told was someone saw a clear recovery, but they thought said he was down. I still don't know if he was down. Now, officials said that he was down. Not the official that watched it. A different official said that he was down when his back was on the guy's legs. But I saw the ball from the sideline jostle out. I couldn't tell if it was across the line or not, but I didn't know who got it. And then Kyron popped up with it way downfield. But there was no explanation given.
No explanation given. There was a lot of that on Saturday, I'm afraid. So let me sum all this up this way. When I first heard a couple of weeks ago that Georgia was spending so much time working on punch-outs, I'm just being honest. As I said before, I try to be honest. When I heard Kirby Smart say that, in my mind, because I am a little bit worried about Georgia right now, this is my favorite team. I want them to win. I speak to tens of thousands of Georgia fans every day that want them to win. So if Georgia's not, as good as we want them to be, it's disappointing. So you're worried about that a little bit. I have to be honest. And in my thought of, well, if they're spending 40 minutes in practice just working on punching the ball out, then they must be really worried about their defense. They must really think they can't get stops, that they're not going to get sacks, they're not going to line up and just stop people, that they're doing. And if I'm being honest, they're doing what sort of feels to me a little bit like a gimmick thing of all you've got left is try to punch the football out. You're not going to line up and just maul people. You're not going to knock back tackles and tackles for loss and all these things we think of Georgia as being. All of a sudden now you're a Big 12 team. You're just trying to strip the football out. If I'm being honest, that's what I first thought. And then on Saturday, the work that they'd done in practice, were certainly with our own eyes led to conclude, resulted in the punch out that created the moment that helped Georgia find a way to win. And you can say a lot about Georgia, and if it's negative, some of it might be true. But you also have to say this. They find a way to win. Sometimes improbably, sometimes miraculously, they find a way to win. And by contrast, this is what Hugh Freeze, the Auburn coach, says his team finds a way to do.
We find ways to not win football games, and that's what has to change. And that locker room is a good enough football team to play with anyone and to win games, creating that mentality that believes you're going to and finding ways to do it and to do your assignment when it's called on in critical moments, like you did the entire first half, is things that we've got to get corrected if we want to experience the joy of winning these close, tough SEC football games. And that's really the way I see it. We felt great about the preparation, felt great about coming into this game, felt like we were going to win the game, and here I am feeling again that we don't quite know how to do that.
You can say a lot about what happened on Saturday, and people are, but nothing's more relevant than that. Hugh Freeze admits it. We don't know how to win. Georgia does, and that was the difference on Saturday. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. And oh boy, do we have to pick up the pace here. But we're glad you're with us, and a lot to discuss, as you already know, about the win for the Dogs on Saturday. Jon Stinchcomb coming up to help us do just that. Big thanks to our friends at Pella Window and Door of Georgia who make today's show possible. You know, we had a great look at a really fun Georgia win on Saturday, and you want a great look at your home too. A home that looks good on the outside, but also a great look from the inside as you look out on your lawn and your neighborhood. Energy-efficient windows, the likes of which that Pella is famous for, is a great way to get all of that. You can tell, at least for the most part, that it's fall. It still gets warm every now and then, but you can tell that it's fall. Fall, obviously, is the precursor to the colder weather season, which will eventually be here too. That means heating bills go up, gas bill, things like that. Well, for the money that you're spending on the energy that you use inside of your house, you don't want to waste it. And energy-efficient windows, the likes of which Pella is famous for, will help make sure that does not happen. You can save money on your bills. Your home's going to feel good on the inside. As I said before, it's going to look good on the outside. It's just the best way to take the best care of your home. And windows are one of those things because you can see through them. You don't always pay attention to them. But if you have not investigated or spent some time thinking about the amazing new technology that Pella is famous for when it comes to windows, this is a great time to do that there as well. They're energy efficient. They keep the cold air when it's cold on the outside where it's supposed to be, your home feeling on the inside the way it's supposed to be, and you get great savings opportunities right now too. How about 50% off qualifying installations or 0% APR for 48 months? All the more reason you got to reach out today. It's PellaGA.com/DawgNation. That's PellaGA.com/DawgNation. Or give them a call, 678-638-1429. 678-638-1429. We are so happy to have Pella Window and Door of Georgia as a part of DawgNation Daily. Happy to have you too. Happy to have Jon Stinchcomb coming up in a moment. Prior to that, though, let's go around the Dawghouse poured today by our friends at Dr. Pepper. It could be possible that we have a fun announcement as it relates to Dr. Pepper later on this week. I don't have full confirmation on that yet, but it could be. Before I bring on John, let me set it up this way. More controversy on Saturday. Once again, drama from McDonough and Greg McElroy as it relates to the late second half moment where Kirby Smart appeared to, and I'm not a liar, it did appear that Kirby Smart signaled timeout, but Smart said he was asking for a penalty on Auburn for simulating a snap count with the clapping. Well, my gosh, once again, McDonough and McElroy, they are beside themselves on this. This is what they said about that.
Can they let him get away with this? Because the play clock was at 1 when they stopped it.
Timeout. We'll reset the ball and run the play. No charge timeout.
No, he's signaling for a timeout. He's signaling for a timeout. The official stopped the play. There's 1 second on the play clock, so they're going to give him a redo and not charge him the timeout?
And I'm sure Hugh Freeze very frustrated by it.
They're showing the replay now on the screen, and that's what Hugh Freeze is pointing to. He's trying to say he was clapping. I'm sorry.
Looks pretty clear to me. I mean, running,
He's clapping there. He's clapping differently than he was when he was obviously clapping.
that's not going to make a very loud clap if you try to just put your fingers into the palm of your hand. I'm not sure it's going to pierce the noise. Might have gotten away with on there.
Hugh Freeze apoplectic. I mean, he has to be thinking what else is going to happen.
Look, we don't need to be so dramatic. McDonough begins that clip by saying, we can't let him get away with this, as if he's like Walter White from Breaking Bad. Look, I promise it's not that serious. And listen, if I was the official, I would have told Kirby Smart, once again, I'm not in the habit of lying. I would have told Kirby Smart, I'm sorry, it certainly appeared that you were asking for a timeout, even if you were also arguing, which he was. Both of these things I believe are true. Smart instinctively asked for a timeout while also complaining about the Auburn simulated snap count. If I was the official, I'm probably forcing Kirby Smart to take a timeout there. I probably would. But at the same time, because this video clip goes so viral, because it does appear to seem to show Kirby Smart calling for a timeout, people are making far more of this than it actually is, including, by the way, Hugh Freeze after the game, who once again was still in excuse-making mode even after the loss. This is Hugh Freeze.
Sure feels like we're not getting many breaks, and it's difficult to take for sure. Even on the, I'll never. I mean, there's a lot of things, but I felt like we broke the plane. All you have to do is the nose of the ball just has to break the plane, and I thought that was had a pretty good shot of that but it didn't go our way, and then. I don't know how they should have had a delay a game or a timeout, and not a whole new play. I'm still not sure what happened there, but there's a lot of times that I make bad calls and officials do the same, but it certainly feels like we're not getting many of the breaks.
Probably not surprised to find out that Kirby Smart's explanation for was it a timeout or was it an arguing for a penalty, his explanation was far different than what Hugh Freeze said. This is Kirby after the game.
Yeah, they're clapping. So I told them before the game, if these guys clap, it's a penalty. They can't clap because it will false snap. I've lost games on that before in the stadium. And I told them, I said, they clap. I'm going to tell you, I got somebody in the box watching every play. They were clapping. So I ran over to him and said, they're clapping. They're clapping. And he thought I called timeout. And so I wanted to make sure he understood it. Go lip read. Because I'm screaming, they're clapping, they're clapping. I didn't need a timeout because we were going to get it off before the shot clock. It was 2-1, and we were going to get it off before the play clock ended, and I didn't need a timeout. It was the fact that they were clapping. I wanted them to call it because it's a penalty.
So let me make a simple point, and we're going to bring on Jon Stinchcomb. As I said before, if I'm the official, I think knowing everything that I know, if I did possess all that knowledge as an official, I'm going to say, yes, you are arguing for a penalty, but you also instinctively call timeout. I would have made Kirby Smart take a timeout there, just being honest about that, even though he was also arguing for the penalty. So to a certain extent, the officials did get that wrong. But here would be my question to the Auburn fans who've tuned in to say, aha, see, there you go. Here's my question. So what? Like, what do you think you're supposed to get for this? Because after that, Georgia got called for the phantom blindside block, which negated what would have been a big play. It's the makeup call that actually hurt Georgia worse than, having to take a timeout, which they didn't really need to use later on, or the delay of game, which probably would have been the more just result. Who cares? I mean, Georgia didn't score on that drive. they got robbed by the officials in the blindside block and ended up missing a field goal. Like, what do you think you're supposed to get for this? And I know the viral video looks good because it seems to show Kirby instinctively signaling for timeout. Could very well be that he didn't realize he had done that, because a lot of people in the heat of competition do things instinctively. Could very well have been the case. As I said before, I'm certainly not going to lie and say it didn't look like Kirby Smart called a timeout. It certainly seemed like he should have. But what, is he supposed to forfeit the game for that? Like, Georgia didn't score on the drive. And the reason why they didn't score is because Auburn was gifted the all-time makeup call on the Cash Jones block in the back. If anything, it would have been more fair to Georgia to line up what would have been 3rd and 17, just line up on a 3rd and 17 and play it straight, as opposed to the gift call that Auburn got on the obviously not a blindside block on Cash Jones, which we don't have to show you, but you've seen it already yourself. To me, it's as simple as that. Okay, yeah, Georgia should have been called for a timeout. But what would that have done for Auburn if they would have been? Like, what would have Auburn gained from all of that? So anyway, controversial day, crazy stuff. But the only thing, if you could only know one thing, 9 straight. Georgia's beating Auburn again, and that's all that matters. And that is around the Dawghouse, poured today by our friends at Dr. Pepper. Now, I told you before, we think we may have a big announcement to make involving Dr. Pepper coming up in the next few days. At least we might have. It's going to be really fun if we do. We'll tell you about it then. But I can tell you this for right now. The rich one-of-a-kind flavor of Dr. Pepper certainly goes well with you. Listen, yesterday I was tired. I needed to pick me up, and of course, Dr. Pepper always helps me out with all of that. And as you're doing your local grocery shopping, wherever you are, pick up the delicious taste of Dr. Pepper, whether it's the brand new flavors, the blackberry zero sugar, or the flavors that have been in your life the entire time, like Diet Dr. Pepper, which I love, the regular Dr. Pepper too. Enjoy yourself some Dr. Pepper today. We are thrilled to have Dr. Pepper as a part of Around the Dawghouse. Now, there was a gigantic story in college football yesterday that has nothing to do with Georgia, but it's interesting to Georgia fans. We'll tell you about that before we're done. But for now, I'm late getting to him, which is rude, but I want to make sure that we hear from him today. Important voice. It's Jon Stinchcomb, DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
People love Jon Stinchcomb on a Monday, so I sincerely apologize for getting to Jon so late, and I do mean that sincerely. Jon, there's a lot to talk about, as you know. Let me begin with where I just was. Am I wrong on either part of this? Yeah, seemed like Kirby Smart was signaling for a timeout. He may not have realized that. I'll make the comparison, which I don't do a lot anymore, but if I'm playing pickup basketball, something I used to enjoy doing, if the ball goes out of bounds, I'm always instinctively pointing my way, or I'm saying I didn't touch it. You know, in the moment, that's just a competitor instinctively. You just react. And, you know, Kirby instinctively thought, maybe I need a timeout. Maybe a timeout's not a good thing to call when it's already 3rd and 12. And what's the difference between 3rd and 12 and 3rd and 17 if I've got the yardage on that right? To my eyes, it certainly seemed like Kirby signaled timeout. He was also arguing for a penalty. He immediately, you know, went back to the argument for the penalty. I think the officials probably got it wrong. I think they probably got, you know, I don't know if they were intimidated by Kirby right there. I think they probably got that wrong, if I'm being honest. That's the case. But I don't know what kind of smoking gun Auburn thinks that's supposed to be, because as a makeup, I would say, for what just happened, they completely called Cash Jones and a phantom penalty on the next play. If anything, if I'm a Georgia fan, I'm saying, hey, let me just play it straight. How about we just make it 3rd and 17, or whatever the yardage would have been. Maybe I've got the yardage wrong. Let's just make it 3rd and 5 yards longer, or take a timeout from us, and let's just have a chance here on 3rd down, as opposed to what was obviously, I would say, something different than that. Starting with just the timeout, is anything that I'm saying on either side of that wrong in your mind?
Here's what I think, BA, is that it was a poorly managed game by the referee crew. You look at it and you go, there was a lot of really close calls, and I don't think they managed them very well. And hopefully I don't get fined. I think that's what Hugh Freeze was trying to avoid at halftime, is a FedEx package saying what he owed back to the conference, because at the end of the day, I don't think anyone leaves feeling really good about the way that game was managed from a referee perspective. There was a number of calls where no one gets a good answer, and that's not the way it should be. Obviously, the goal line was a close call. Georgia fans see it one way as to when the ball was punched out. I don't think it's a question of whether it was punched out. But with the sideline timeout call, I think it was an evolution. I think what's important there in that I think he starts off calling timeout, and in his headset, I'm sure he is receiving information that they're clapping. Now that I think is pivotal. Was the defense clapping? My understanding is yes, they were.
Yeah.
So if they were clapping, that's a penalty, and he's trying to highlight it. Whether or not he's calling timeout, I think it started off as a timeout. That's just my personal opinion. I think as he's working his way down the sideline, it goes timeout to in his earpiece. He's getting they're clapping, which becomes they're clapping. Very clearly by the end of this, Coach Smart is telling the refs he's clapping. I don't know why that's that big of a deal. I don't know why the Auburn fans are so focused on that particular piece, because that one particular call is not in isolation. You look at the Cash Jones blindside block is total trash. I mean, what about that is blindside? Maybe it's offensive pass interference or blocking downfield. I don't know what it could be, but blindside isn't the right call. So again, the goal line touchdown, another controversial call. How is that not a touchdown? With that said, if Georgia gets the ball back, if anything, there's 54 men on the field, including 3 coaches. I think Glenn Schumann and Kirby Smart are actually pushing our players down the field to finish the play and score. So I don't think it ever ends up in Georgia having a touchdown just because there were so many extra players on the field by that time. But I think it speaks to the bigger narrative that the referees didn't manage the game in a way where fans and coaches and players leave feeling like it was managed appropriately. And that's a point of frustration, especially for the losing team. We'll have to hear the moaning and the belly aching from Auburn fans for years to come.
So I want to get deep in the weeds for a second, hopefully not too deep, but I think you're saying something really important. In defense of the officials who did not have a good night, and I think both sides would probably say this, John, as someone who goes to these games and sees everything that's happening that's not always shown on TV, we are asking these officials to do a lot right now. They are managing so much. I'll give you 2 examples. There's a moment in which Georgia gets a delay of game on Saturday in which the officials standing over the ball, they're not letting Georgia snap it because Georgia probably subbed a little late. And then the teams now, Brett Bielema is famous for this, but every team does some version of this. They're dragging these defensive linemen on like a snail's pace, and they're, lurching their way onto the field, trying to eat up as much of the play clock as they possibly can. And the officials have to give time to sub, and now the defense is going to take as much of that time as they can. Then conversely, there's the opposite where Auburn almost ran a player on. Then they ran him back off because they realized, well, we run this guy on. Now Georgia can do the same thing to us. And so they ran him on, ran him off. Georgia ended up having to call a timeout because they wanted to sub, thought they were going to get to, but when Auburn didn't sub, they had to run their guys off. And the officials have to keep track of all of this. People don't realize how much of this is going on between snaps of the officials are judging who's faking an injury, who's subbing, how long do they get to sub, and whatever else. And frankly, officials in football have less power than, say, like baseball umpires do. A baseball umpire has a lot of power. Balls and strikes, things like that. If the manager argues, the umpire, if he tells you to shut up, you pretty much have to because you're just going to get ejected for arguing balls and strikes. By comparison, football officials don't have nearly as much power. Maybe they just need more power and authority to tell these coaches to shut up. And I even mean that sometimes it goes against us because we're asking guys to manage a lot in a pressure-packed environment. And these dudes on Saturday, they just wilted in the moment. The moment was too big for them on Saturday, and that's all there is to it.
Yeah, I think ultimately we get distracted because we focus on the refs, and what an impossible job. I would never want to be a ref. They are never going to be right. Every fan's going to hate them. At least half the stadium is going to be upset with whatever call you make. And it's a really difficult job. But that's not my main takeaway from this game. I know it's going to be a focus. It's a point of conversation for a while, mainly because we have high definition, 74 different angles that we can watch every play and complain about it. And after the fact, go back and we see very clearly that it should have been one way or the other. And in the moment, I think that the ask of the modern day ref is exceptionally difficult.
Yeah.
We can talk about that as much as you want, BA, but I think for me, there's other aspects of that game that are highlighted for Georgia that have longer implications. One, I'm really glad that we won. At the end of the day, we beat Tennessee. Needed some help there. Missed field goal late in the game. At the end of the day, worst first half of football I've seen in a long time from Georgia. Both sides of the ball, lack of opportunity offensively, just continued to take these first half punches in ways that I don't know how many of these shots a team can take, but consistently past 3 SEC games, you look and you go, man, that's a lot for a team to sustain. So I think we learned a lot about Georgia. I think we've learned that we don't wilt. We don't quit. Georgia finds a way. It's never been more a tale of two halves than this Auburn game. You look and say, as poorly as we played in that first half, we found a way. And that's been a recurring theme where, you shouldn't have to take a haymaker like Georgia is in the first half. But I'm proud of the fact that this team does not quit. They do not lose focus. They don't shy away from the moment. And I think what Coach Freeze was talking about in his team, in his post-game conference of they find ways to lose, what a horrible position to be in.
Yeah.
How bad could it be where you have talent in your locker room, but yet at the end of the day, you come away with a loss? And that's what they have to face, whereas Georgia's dealing with it going, how can we not absorb these heavy blows in the first half and put us in a better situation where we don't have to have perseverance, where we don't have to rally, because that's really not the way this team's set up. So I think we learned a lot about this Georgia team and continue to as this season plays out. And I'd much rather do that learning with a win in the win column as opposed to the other proposition as to what Auburn's facing this week.
So let me do both sides of what you just said there. And starting with kind of what led to Georgia being in such a tough predicament on Saturday, it's been a long time since I felt this way, but I do believe I feel this way now. And I don't say this to troll anybody. I'm certainly not trying to be excessively critical. I'm just trying to call it as I see it. I think the ceiling for this team right now is below a national championship. Now, there's room for stuff to change. There's time for it to change. And Georgia's been proving people wrong for a long time. I'm certainly not going to stand on the table and, stake my claim on this. I'm just letting it vent here right now. Given what we've seen from Georgia in the big games here right now, I think the ceiling is something south of a national championship right now. Is that too harsh in your mind?
In normal years, I would probably agree with you. In this year, there is no historic team out there. Nobody in this league. Who's in the top 5 right now that you say, oh, they're great? There's no great teams. Ohio State is probably the front runner for me in my mind right now, but Oregon, obviously beatable. Ole Miss, top 5 team, almost lost to Washington State. Look across the board. No one is elite right now. And Georgia's still in that conversation. Georgia is a good team. They're not a great team right now. Can they get better? I certainly hope so. You watch the way they play, and for all the fans out there that complain about the quick pass game and the screens, show me 2 back-to-back passes from the pocket where Gunner's not getting hit in the chops.
Yeah.
And then you'll understand why we're running the plays that we run. And it is frustrating, and you do want to see a variety, but until we start executing, until we can run pass plays where our quarterback's not getting punched in the face constantly, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it anymore. So Georgia has to improve. Yes. Do they look elite from what we've seen in years past and what it takes to win a national championship? No, they don't. Not even close. But across the league, I don't see any team that's going, ooh, wow, head and shoulders above the rest. There's 3 or 4 teams that just stand out from the pack. Doesn't exist this year. So I think there's opportunities. You have to have plays that break your way. I think we've experienced that at least twice now, Tennessee and Auburn specifically, where the ball had to bounce in our direction to come out with wins. And I think good teams put themselves in positions to utilize plays like that. And Georgia's a good team. They're not elite. They're not historic. But my assessment across the league is not many teams are this year.
So that said, halfway point of the regular season, Georgia's 5-1. When you look at what Georgia is compared to what Georgia's about to play, it's a tough schedule, but Georgia's also going to be a favorite, I believe, in every one of these games coming up. It is not a stretch of the imagination at all to say, even with Georgia's blemishes and imperfections, they could replicate in the second half of the regular season what they did in the first half of the regular season. They can get to 10-2, perhaps better, but they can get to 10-2 and be back in the college football playoff. And so my rule is always, if you can't win them all, I want to win as many as I can. And I know that sounds simplistic, but that really is the way I approach this of, hey, Ole Miss on Saturday is a gigantic game. Getting the win against Auburn is a monumental feat given how big of a hole you dug yourself in the beginning. So while Georgia does seem to have some limitations that are a little bit unusual for us to see Georgia have, the opportunity for Georgia to keep itself in contention, boy, that path seems pretty clear here too, right?
Yes, and I think that's the reason for optimism here. It can go either way. We've got some tough games left on the schedule. You just mentioned it. Ole Miss coming up this weekend. There's none bigger. But Georgia can get better. You look, and this isn't a low ceiling team. This is a team that needs to play better to reach their goals, and I think they're capable of it. Obviously, a healthy offensive line would help in that direction. I think our defense has started from the back foot a number of games this season. And I don't think it's from a lack of preparation. If anything, I think teams are kind of using that against us. I think they recognize that Georgia prepares for their opponents based on their tendencies, and we play what I'll call a sophisticated scheme at times. And teams, I think, this is my personal opinion, I think they're using it against us. I think they recognize the sophistication that we go into a game with and have found ways to break those tendencies to the detriment of Georgia. And that's why, for the fans, we play like a different team, we're able to adjust. I think we've got really good coaches that understand what's happening and can do that and convey that to the players on the fly. But it's because we go in with such a good scheme to take away what a team does best. I think they're using that against us right now. So could be wrong there. Maybe that's my personal hot take. But big picture stuff, I think there's opportunities for this Georgia team to get better. They need to. They still can reach a lot of lofty goals. We're still talking about a winning team that's only lost once in a game that they could have won. And so it's capable. This team is capable of still playing at a high level and putting out some good football, but it's not one of those where you go in each week knowing whether or not we're going to win, and whether or not the biggest question is by how much. That's just not where we sit right now.
So if you don't mind, let me just squeeze in one final thing before we let you go. And this may be a loaded question, but when you look at what Georgia still needs, whether it be, obviously some defensive issues on display in the first half, or as you said, Gunner's, maybe not being protected as well as he could on Saturday against a very good Auburn defensive front. Georgia's also not very explosive offensive right now. You can list some things that Georgia's, maybe seeking improvement on. Is there an area you say that's one that can get better? Because a couple of these I'm like, boy, I don't know that gets fixed during this season. Is there something where Georgia needs improvement where you say that could be better by November? That could show up in December. Is there an area like that where you have maybe higher hopes than the average person does?
Yeah, I think just let's start offensively. I think we start with protection. We can protect better. Our run game is much improved. I think it helps having a running quarterback. I think you've seen a number of different designs to get Dylan Bell the ball and the ball into our playmaker's hand in space. Auburn's defense, this has been overshadowed a little bit. Auburn's defense is good. Their defensive front is solid. And I think we saw at times they had the upper hand. And we're not going to face a group like that week in and week out. And I certainly would hope that we will get healthier and get smarter as the season goes on. Your right side starters are both true freshmen. So athletic ability is there. Each rep, each game, they have to come away and say, what can I get better on? I think we've got those guys. I think a healthy Monroe Freeling will certainly help. But you talk about playmaking, you talk about big plays. I see the plays are being called. We can't give our quarterback enough time to get the ball where it needs to go consistently. I think that's the biggest issue is consistency. So that can get better. It needs to get better for big plays in big games. Right now, we're having to ground and pound, and it's not all that sexy. And the wide receiver screens and the quick passes and the frustration from the fans. I think understanding that in order to have those big plays, in order to give time for our receivers to get downfield, we've got to protect the pocket a little better. That only makes sense to me. So we can get better there offensively. Defensively, I think it's a matter of execution. I think you see the number of angles that were taken kind of poorly in that first half, which is surprising. Haven't seen a lot of that. Getting off of blocks has been a little bit of a challenge, especially in the pass game. There are ways that we can tighten up. Missed opportunities for turnovers. Man, yet again, a quarterback beams our secondary player with the ball and it doesn't end up in a turnover. Same thing with first series against Alabama. I think if we can just take those easy opportunities to get those turnovers, it would certainly help. And, obviously third down conversion has been an issue in some of these big games, but against Auburn, it was because they're in 3rd and 2 and we lost in those early downs. And that's why you saw the big flip in the second half is we were able to force Auburn to play behind the sticks, if you will. So a couple different areas where Georgia can get better. And I think that's something that they can fix as you go along. There's a lot of teams that don't have that opportunity. You look and you say, we're going to have to generate elsewhere because we don't have it. I think Georgia does.
John, I appreciate your analysis. I think it's so spot on and obviously measured and, just well considered. So I appreciate that so much. Big day here. Georgia gets a win, but boy, a lot to think about is heading towards a massive home game against Ole Miss on Saturday. Thank you for talking about it with us. Appreciate your time, and we'll look forward to talking to you soon.
I appreciate the opportunity, BA. Go Dogs.
Go Dogs indeed.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
So a couple of things here just for a moment. First of all, as John was saying, why the big deal about the timeout? And I obviously had my piece with that too. As someone who lives in the viral video business to a certain extent, obviously we want videos to get as much attention as they can. I think the biggest deal about the timeout, not timeout from Saturday, and I said before, I would have had no problem if the officials had forced Kirby to take that timeout or charged Georgia with the delay of game. I really wouldn't have had a big issue with that necessarily. I think that Smart is correct when he says, hey, I was arguing for the clapping. Yes, I believe he was. We can obviously see that he is. And I believe instinctively, maybe he didn't realize this, but instinctively, he also asked for a timeout. I think the officials would have been within their rights to demand that he take it or just give him the delay of game. I would have not complained too loudly had that been the case. But ultimately, this becomes a really big deal for two groups of people. Auburn fans, because they're looking for something to blame, and people who weren't actually watching the game, going back to the viral video thing. The discussion of this online is powered by these viral videos where it seems to a lot of people that Kirby appeared to do what he said he wasn't doing. It certainly looked like he was calling timeout, and maybe all Georgia fans, we just clap this way now, fingers pointing into the palm. I thought it was funny in the clip we played earlier of Greg McElroy when he said, that's not going to create a very loud clap. You're not going to pierce the noise if you're clapping this way. Pretty sarcastic from McElroy, who we know has a good relationship with Kirby. The point is, but the video goes so viral because there's nothing that people who spend too much time on the internet love more than, ooh, I gotcha. This video proves that you're not saying that you didn't do what you said you did. So the whole thing goes viral, becomes a really big deal. But in terms of the actual impact on the game, the result is is inconsequential. Auburn didn't get hurt by this. And the officials, I think, if I had to guess, my opinion, saw to it that they didn't by throwing a phantom flag on the very next play. So, you got what you wanted as far as all of that goes. Before we do our SEC through, can I give a quick shout out to our friends at Cercheros here for a moment? You talk about a great way to enjoy your game day. We love everything from our friends at Cercheros. It's the Fresh Max. And listen, it's a great lunch experience. We had a great time the other day at the Alpharetta location. You pop in there, you go through the line, you can get your veggies grilled. And the reason why I always say that is because it's an example of what Cercheros is all about. It's Fresh Max, meaning that your meal is freshly prepared for you. It wasn't made 12 months ago for whoever, 1,000 miles away. No, this is real food made for you by friendly people. That's what Cercheros is famous for. It's what they're all about. And when you go in store, you experience that. There are more than 40 locations here in Georgia, across the South, and you perhaps have your own experience with that. And because of the great care they take with all the food that they make, we think it's a great option for you on game days too, whether it be game watching party at home. A lot of you do that on Saturday. Big tailgate. You're getting ready for a huge one in Athens this Saturday. Let the Fresh Mex of Cercheros keep all of your friends, fans that in your life happy here. You go to Cercheros.com to find out more about that. Burritos, bowls, quesadillas, the whole thing, everything they're famous for. You can enjoy all of that today. All right, let's get ready for our SEC through here and talk about some big news, actually outside the SEC, but still relevant to SEC fans. Massive story yesterday. Now, think about how quickly timelines evolve here. 3 weeks ago, Penn State's getting ready for wideout. Oregon, biggest game in the country, certainly among them. They lose that. They lose on the road to UCLA as more than a 20-point favorite. Come home, more than a 20-point favorite against Northwestern. They lose again. And as you're probably aware, James Franklin is out of a job. And this brings up two things. Thing number one is how quickly it seems this season programs are making a decision to fire their coach. None quicker than this, given the fact that Franklin was a coach in good standing of a team ranked number 2 to begin the year, but it is in keeping with, South Carolina just fired its offensive line coach. Coaches are getting fired pretty quickly here right now. The second thing is it seems like the programs that fire them are not blushing at paying these gigantic buyouts. I saw where, for instance, y'all know who Dave Portnoy is from Barstool Sports. He was on social media yesterday saying, why do these coaches get these big buyouts to begin with? I think that's probably reflective of a fairly common opinion among some fans about why such a big buyout anyway? What's the leverage to generate such a buyout? So for a couple of seconds beyond just James Franklin, let me talk about the notion of coaching firings for a moment. I'm going to try to keep this quick, but I think there are two things to understand about coaching firings and buyouts that are really, I think, important for how college football operates. Here's thing number one. One of the things that's fascinating to me in life is how sports are sometimes just like life away from sports, but in some cases very different. This is an example of sports being very different than normal life. Let me try to explain this quickly. A lot of you own small businesses. It's a family business. It's a home-based business. It's something like that you started. For some of you, it's a side hustle. And then eventually, and you know this, a side hustle or a part-time business can eventually become more successful. And maybe it becomes your job. And then it becomes more successful than that. Some of you have experienced this. And if you haven't experienced this, this is hard to understand. But some of you have experienced this. What happens when your business that's your job starts to get more successful, you now have more business than you can handle. That seems like a great problem, but it's actually stressful. It's actually stressful. Because what you realize is, in order to manage the incoming orders that I'm getting, in order to manage the incoming business that I have, I'm going to have to make a hire. And oftentimes like an administrative hire, or maybe it's a sales-related hire if you've got a different kind of business. It's either administration or sales. That's the first hire that almost every small business eventually makes. And here's what you know if you've done this, that this hire is going to make or break your business. If you hire the right person, they help you handle the orders, create even more business, and now you're more successful than you ever would have been, and maybe you're scaling this multiple times in the future. But if you hire the wrong person, all of a sudden now they become a net drain on your income. And this business that was thriving to the point that it needed to hire somebody, all of a sudden has hired the wrong person. And now your cash flow is completely messed up. And then you go out of business. A lot of you have understood this, that as you are a part of a small business that grows, the first hire you make either makes or breaks the business that you have. So what is the thing, and if you've ever read like a business book or listened to, I don't know, TED Talk or something like that, what is the thing that all small business owners that are smart do when they make their first hire? They hire slowly. You may take 2 years to find the right person, but it's worth it to find the right person, because hiring the wrong person can literally cause you to go out of business when you're making your first hires. The point here is college football teams do not have the luxury of hiring slowly. The nature of the college football calendar demands that you're going to have to hire quickly. And like any other business, when you are forced to hire quickly, the chances of you making a bad hiring decision go up dramatically. So when you look around the landscape of college football, you see a lot of coaches get fired. It seems like knee-jerk and reactionary, and boy, the business is so crazy. And I'm sure the coaches themselves feel that way. But when you understand college football as a business compared to other businesses, the reason why more coaches get fired than your average, associate in a law firm or a resident in a medical practice, the reason why more coaches get fired than other high-paid workers in other fields is because they are hired more quickly, and you don't have as much time to make a good hiring decision as you would if you just had more time to consider what you are doing. So there will always be a frantic pace in college football and other professional sports that just generate a lot more firings. Now you say, well, what about the buyout? Here's the other thing I think that does not get properly understood. Theoretically, what would Nick Saban have been worth? Let's say your big state U in random place, whatever, in the prime of his career, if you could have had Nick Saban as your coach, what would that have been worth? I would suggest easily $1 billion in terms of the money he makes the Athletic Association because of the wins, the enrollment increase at Alabama, the peripheral for the businesses around Tuscaloosa and all the partners of Alabama athletics. Nick Saban was easily a $1 billion commodity for Alabama, about 10 times what his actual salary was. This is why coaches have such high buyouts, because in the hierarchy of coaching, if you are close enough to the top of that hierarchy that it seems like you might be a great coach, then you clearly have huge value because of what you could turn out to be. 10x your actual salary. And if it turns out that you're not a great coach, firing you and paying the buyout still has huge return on investment because maybe the next coach you hire will be. In other words, even in this day and age of NIL and transfer portal and all the things that seem to make player value greater than coaching value, truly great coaches still matter. Look at what, for instance, I don't like this guy, but look at what Kirk Cignetti is doing in Indiana. You got to give him credit. He has come in, completely transformed the Indiana program. Whatever Indiana's paying Cignetti, he's clearly worth multiples of that actual salary. The great coaches always are. And so therefore, if you look around and realize, like Penn State did with James Franklin, we don't have a great coach, then you'd be wise to fire him. Because much like smart companies hire slowly, smart companies always fire quickly. Once you realize that the guy you have is not the right guy, you'd be foolish to let it fester any longer than it has to. And that's what Penn State did on Saturday, and that's why you see, or should say Sunday, that's why you see more of this sort of thing going on here right now. Let me also mention this very quickly, and this is not about Georgia, but it comes back to Georgia. We'll get into some of the other games from this weekend tomorrow. I did notice that Florida State lost again, this time to Pitt. I saw the number here. Now, they obviously beat Alabama to begin the season. It's amazing that lesser teams seem to have an ability to beat Alabama that Georgia doesn't possess. I don't have an explanation for that, but it does seem true. But beyond that, I saw the number. Do I have this right? Y'all check me on this. I heard and saw that Florida State has only won like one of its last 11 ACC games or something crazy like that. They're like on a 1-10 run in ACC play right now. Not SEC or even Big Ten or, one of these better leagues, but the most powerful program in the ACC, more resources, NIL money to spend, NFL guys on the roster. They've won like one of their last 11 ACC games or some crazy number like that. My point in bringing this up is that's obviously not very good for Florida State, but I think it also comes back to what happened for Georgia on Saturday. We'll look at Auburn and say, well, Georgia beating them 9 times in a row, ho-hum, so what, so big, no big deal. But yeah, Florida State's an example of this. There are other examples of this. Winning the so-called easy games is never quite as easy as it's supposed to be. Ole Miss struggled with Washington State on Saturday. Eventually won, but struggled for a moment. And we can, and I'm sure we will this week, talk about all the areas in which Georgia needs to be better. And they're not insignificant. And we do need to discuss them because Georgia fans want a fair hearing on all of that. And we obviously exist to provide that. But you cannot lose sight of this. Teams that think of themselves as power programs, the program of the Tomahawk Chop and Bobby Bowden and a million NFL guys, they can't even win ACC games anymore because even supposed easy games in which Florida State's usually a big favorite, even those can be hard to win for a program that's not buttoned up, that's not taking care of business and doing everything it's supposed to do. So do not lose sight of the fact that Georgia seems like can't really rush the passer and can't produce explosive plays and can't do this and can't do that. And yet somehow they can still win. They can still win. And that's no small thing. And it is certainly something that Georgia fans ought to be happy about because there are a lot of other teams, including Florida State, that would be pretty envious of all of that. Will make that our SEC through. Okay, before we go, speaking of getting big wins against ACC teams, that is something that Georgia wants to do at the end of this season. And we think this is a big opportunity. Now, it was Georgia Tech's decision to move Clean Old Fashioned Hate into Mercedes-Benz Stadium this year. The game has a different moniker this season because of that. But all of this, the point is, creates a real opportunity for Georgia fans. There's no telling how expensive tickets to Saturday's game are on the secondary market. If you want to go see Georgia against Ole Miss, and if you want to go to Auburn on Saturday, I'm sure that was a pretty penny too. But your most accessible ticket to a big game, and y'all, let's be honest here, this Georgia Tech game gets bigger every week. Tech, to its credit, is playing really well. They're going to be, a highly ranked team, it certainly seems like, and they're going to have a chance at the college football playoff. All the more reason we need to pack Mercedes-Benz Stadium Black Friday afternoon for the renewal of this great in-state rivalry. We need as many Georgia fans there as possible. This is one of those years which Tech is decent, which means Tech fans are going to dig in the back of their closet and find their Tech gear. They're going to put that on and be Tech fans again. So some of them are going to want to be there for this particular game. That's why you got to scarf up the tickets before they do. Go to mercedes-benzstadium.com/events. That's mercedes-benzstadium.com/events. Get your tickets for Georgia against Georgia Tech Black Friday afternoon in Mercedes-Benz Stadium. We need you there. Let's make it a home game for Georgia, and let's take over the Benz on Black Friday. And for our golden shoe today, art imitating life. Last week we talked about one of my favorite memories from my childhood, the 1986 Georgia-Auburn game. Georgia fans stormed the field. The water hoses got turned on. It is truly an event that lives on in infamy, and there's a great story by Mark Schleybaugh, ESPN.com, about that last week. We talked about it. Well, a version of that, at least on Saturday, our Cody Chafin's catching this on video. We were wrapping up our post-game duties. The water hoses came on again. Now, this is the actual, irrigation system for the field. Came shooting on. I had to run out of the way. I did get pretty wet from this. I had to run out of the way on this. There's the meme out there that say haters say it's fake. People have accused us of staging this for the for the engagement. First of all, I already get engagement. I don't need to do that artificially. But second of all, there's actually an Auburn show that was still doing their show at the time. They got super drenched by this. So we were joking about it just because it ties back to the old 1986 game, but this really did happen, and there was an Auburn show that got absolutely drenched by this, more so than we did. But I did get pretty wet from this. So a throwback to 1986 with the water hoses coming on, which, by the way, is the second time this year on a road game that we've gotten run off the field by the water hoses. So maybe that's a thing now. But as long as Georgia keeps winning these road games, we got no problem with that. So we'll give Cody a golden shoe for catching it on video. And you know what? We'll give Auburn folks some golden shoes for their hospitality here this weekend, too. Fun to be back in Jordan-Hare Stadium, seeing Georgia win that one again. Speaking of Georgia rivals that can't beat UGA, how about lousy, stinking Gators? 1,801 days. That's how long it's been since Florida's beating Georgia. That is our Gator Hater Updater. Y'all have a great day. We're back tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. We will look forward to talking to you then. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews cool down. R.S. Andrews, when you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs, they show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price is promised. You can trust them on all of that. All right, let's get some comments. We'll find out how people are doing here today. Randy Glass, good to see him. He says Tech's going to be undefeated when we play them, and we're going to humble them this year. I mean, one way or another, it shapes up to be a pretty big game. Tech's got an interesting road test this week at Duke. And that's, probably a tougher game than maybe some Jackets fans probably realize. If they haven't, been paying attention to Tech since the Paul Johnson era, circling her back around to their team again. Now that they're, ranked and whatnot, they're going to find out that maybe Duke's a little bit better team than they realize here for this week. But we'll see. It's going to be a big game no matter what. All right, let's see what else. Bill Camacho says, Sunbelt Billy's going to be on the hot seat if he loses Mississippi State. Yeah, listen, I had another bloodbath in my picks again this week. I've been awful the last couple of weeks. But the one thing we did get right was that Florida would go to A&M and lose, and Billy Napier would be right back on the same hot seat as he was prior to the win against Texas, and that's basically what happened. So, yeah, he's right back where he was. And, of course, Mississippi State is much improved. That is absolutely true. And you know what? To be honest, Georgia better be on guard for going there in a few weeks, too, because nothing's given here right now. UGA Marine says James Franklin to UCLA. I mean, one way or another, that's his prediction anyway. I mean, one way or another, James Franklin's going to be a hot commodity in coaching, and I'm sure he's going to be pretty eager to show that he's better than whatever we got from him at Penn State, which was a guy that really did not win big games. And the Penn State coaching search is going to be gigantic. They have money. They are near a pretty, fertile-ish recruiting area, Western Pennsylvania, some of the area of Northern Ohio. That's not terrible high school football in those areas. Penn State's, because of that, a pretty good job. UGA Marine also wondering about Dan Mullen's future. Yeah, they're undefeated. Their defense is terrible, but somehow they still keep winning games, which is kind of fun, I guess. I'm assuming that if Mullen took the UNLV job, that means he wants to coach. So if you want to coach in Vegas, then you want to coach at a better job too. So my guess is that there'll be a lot of programs kicking the tires on Mullen. But the one thing is a little bit like, say, Mike Norvell at Florida State, is the entirety of your recruiting apparatus is going to be whatever your NIL is, because Mullen just doesn't have those chops. That's just not what he's good at. And that's Florida State's problem, and that's why Norvell didn't get the Alabama job. He's just not a good recruiter. JUCO guys, spending money, NIL, who couldn't do that? But when it comes to really working the high school ranks, which you still have to do, that's going to be Mullen's toughest selling point in a job interview, is whether or not he can do that. West GA Dog fan also pointing out that Penn State had a 5-star running back decommit. I did notice that. I don't know a ton about it, but I did notice that. Randy Glass says he doesn't see how Georgia's a touchdown favorite over Ole Miss. Yeah, I can tell you this, and listen, I don't think of myself as a quant. I'm not originating lines. I'm not pretending to be. But I can tell you I did not have Georgia as, what was it? What we see? 5.5, 6, something along those lines. I did not have Georgia favored by that much over Ole Miss. No, I did not. Randy, I'm right there with you on that. Let us see what else. Spencer Clark says that Washington State almost beat Ole Miss. Yeah, I don't read anything to that. And if anything, honestly, Y'all know what that is. I mean, you just know. And y'all know I'm not the world's biggest Lane Kiffin fan, but let's call this what it is. If they played that bad against Washington State, what do you think they were doing the week before Washington State? My guess is they were practicing for Georgia every single day. As they said in Northeast Georgia when I was growing up, every day. They spent every day last week practicing for Georgia. Because if you play that bad against Washington State got blown out by North Texas. Washington State got obliterated by the mean green of North Texas. And they were hanging with Ole Miss all day long. And I'm telling you right now, that doesn't make me feel better about the game. It makes me feel worse. Not because I think Georgia's going to lose, but it just lets me know that Lane Kiffin spent, once again, to use a Northeast Georgia phrase, every day last week practicing for Georgia. They're going to do the same thing again this week too. So much like Georgia had to face an opponent in Auburn that spent 2 weeks getting ready for them, they're going to be facing Ole Miss, who apparently spent 2 weeks getting ready for Georgia too. That is just the way that goes. Gary Roach, Gary, a great guy. I got a chance to hang out with him for a minute on Friday. Really good, local coach in the area, part of our game there on Friday. Love seeing him. That was awesome. What a great experience that was. River Ridge was so kind to, really very, very kind to us. Very, very good host for us for our drive for the GHSA state title on Friday. And Gary's a guy that once, coached Davin Bellamy when Davin was still in high school and knows about all of that. So really fun hanging out with Gary a little bit on Friday. And I do think that Gary's right. I think if I'm being honest, and I have to be honest, even if it doesn't help me with my audience, I wouldn't be able to look myself in the mirror if I wasn't honest. I think that Kirby was doing both. I do think he was arguing for the snap infraction penalty on Auburn, the clapping, the simulating the snap. And I think he also had signaled for a timeout. I think he was doing both. I do. City Boy checks in to say, go Hoosiers. It's amazing. This is a perfect example of this. When teams are good, their fans will just sort of gravitate in here. And right now, I got to tell you, and listen, once again, I'm not in the habit of lying. Indiana's pretty good right now. They're like, where'd they get these defensive guys from? I feel like they're better on defense. I think they're better on, at least based on what we saw against Oregon on Saturday, they're better on defense now than they were a year ago. Will says Ole Miss is not going to perform against Georgia the way it did against Washington State. 1 gazillion% is that true. You are 1 gazillion% correct. G. Gray says Cignetti's going to be getting some phone calls. Yeah, my guess is he probably is. He is paid a lot of money, though, right? And I'm sure he'll get paid more. But he is paid a lot of money, right? My point is, I'm not saying that he's not going to get a raise and stuff like that. That's not what I'm saying. But they already ponied up pretty good for him, right? Katie Lester asks a good question. Did Bowens miss time for pass blocking or was he injured? Everybody that I've talked to thinks that Bowens was injured. I'm talking about people on the field and people just kind of around the game. There seems to be some murmuring that Bowens was injured. Now, there was no question post-game about that or about Juan Gaston. I'm telling you right now, Gaston didn't look right to me. And I know he missed time at the end of the game, but there were a couple of times when he was hobbling pretty good on that ankle. I don't think we got questions about Bowens or Gaston. We're only a few minutes away from Kirby Smart press conference today. I almost certainly will get that, but we're not going to get anything on that. So we're going to be forced to make our best guess, but it's an educated guess because people who certainly know the Georgia injury situation better than I do seem to think he was banged up. Kirby's Belt says Oregon's players aren't as dominant as last year. I don't have a problem if somebody wants to say, now listen, we just gave Indiana a ton of credit. We just gave them a ton of credit. I don't have a problem if somebody wants to say some of that big home game is on Oregon a little bit. Yeah, they won at Penn State, but Penn State's not, beating anybody. That's why James Franklin just got fired. That if you're Oregon, and listen, there is no bigger Dan Lanning fan than I am. Gigantic Dan Lanning fan. If you're Oregon, you need to win that game. I don't have a problem putting some of that back on Oregon. Jonathan Aaron says, I say James Franklin to somewhere like Virginia Tech, Dan Mullen to somewhere like Penn State. I'll tell you this, I think that low-key the Virginia Tech job is a job I'd like to have. I think that's a pretty good job. Jim Blair says, go Dogs and Hogs from Moultrie, Georgia. Obviously down there cheering on those Colquitt County Packers and the Georgia Bulldogs. We love that. Joseph Kennedy talking about Scam Newton. We were one of our callers on Saturday, William Perry, said this. So when I was doing the post-game show on Saturday, I didn't tell you all this just because trying to stay, on topic. But Cam Newton was literally standing like 5 feet behind me almost the entire time I was doing the show. He was on the whatever. Lee Carr says to stop laughing when you're trying to speak. It's annoying. Lee, I'm sorry for laughing. I'll try to be more robotic with my words. Every now and then we actually don't take ourselves super seriously. So if that's a source of annoyance, that is a source of annoyance I'm going to have to learn to tolerate. Jamie Huff says he doesn't give a you-know-what about getting funny calls in our favor. It says the refs took a natty from us in 2017. Yeah, I mean, listen, whether it be Tyler Simmons was onside or, more importantly, the total anarchy from the Georgia-Texas game last October. This idea that there was a miscarriage of justice, it was that. And there are a lot of Auburn fans who think they're going to get a letter from the SEC this week, the same way they did at the Oklahoma game. The Oklahoma game was a misapplied rule. There was no rule misapplied when it comes to the Jackson-Arnold fumble. And look, you can say, well, the refs got it wrong on the timeout, but they fixed it. In the moment, they fixed it because they jobbed Georgia in the very next one. And if you don't think makeup calls are a thing, I'm sorry, anybody who's ever played organized sports understands the degree to which makeup calls are just a thing. They just are. Most of life is governed by unwritten rules. This is very hard for some people to understand because some people are only literal. They don't have they don't have whatever theory of mind requires non-literal thinking. But most of life is governed by unwritten rules, societal norms in some cases. Officiating is very much that way, very much that way. And the number one solution in the eyes of an official for a bad call is a makeup call. And after Kirby Smart, to my eyes, even though he was also arguing for a penalty, to my eyes, probably got away with one. They hammered Georgia on the very next one. To me, Georgia got charged with a felony for what was essentially only a misdemeanor. It would have been better for Georgia had it got a timeout taken from it, or even better, the more logical thing, make it a delay of game, back it up 5 yards, at least play that straight as opposed to what happened after that. And I really don't think it's anything more, complicated than that. George Herndon says we've been robbed more than our share against Bama. Yeah, listen, Georgia fans and all SEC fans going to have long memories about stuff like that. I also don't think it's a huge problem. Of course, I'm a Georgia fan. We're a Georgia show. We are making a pro-Georgia argument. I think we see enough from the national media to know if we don't make the case for Georgia, who's going to? So when we think it needs to be made, yeah, like the Jackson-Arnold fumble, we're going to do that because if we don't, clearly the national media is not going to carry the water for Georgia. So we got to do it because no one else will. Now, I'm also not in the habit of making stuff up because while there'd be a short-term gain of, you get a few likes, get a few whatever, honestly, there's, long-term credibility at stake. So when it comes to timeout, yeah. To me, in addition to arguing for the penalty, looked like Kirby also instinctively signaled timeout, immediately regretted that decision and, tried to move on from it, which in the heat of competition is probably understandable. Kirby says that's not what he was doing. I take Kirby at his word. I'm just giving my read of the situation as someone who watched it happen in real time. But if you tune into an Auburn show today, to the extent they even exist, they're obviously arguing something different. It makes sense they'd argue their thing. It makes sense we'd argue our thing. And sometimes sometimes it doesn't have to be more complicated than that. This is all, for the most part, in good fun. And while I make fun of the Auburn people for being as mad as they were, and hopefully not laughing too much because apparently that's annoying, but when it's all said and done, there's also a certain empathy that I have of, man, I bet the Auburn fans must be really frustrated because their team is really, really finding a way to give it away. All right, let's do a couple more. Francisco Hurtado says, the fumble recovery breaking the play, and when is the play complete? After the whistle. That's right. And if you'll notice, in real time, this is a very important thing to understand, as I said before. Just like if you had invented Facebook, you would have invented Facebook. If it was a touchdown, it would have been a touchdown. It was never a touchdown. It was never a touchdown. The officials, seeing it happen, run, as they're trained to do, run toward the ball along the goal line, looking to see if Arnold with the ball had crossed the plane. Because, as you know, in real time, in immediate moments, you're just not going to be able to see it oftentimes, especially in a tush-push play like that, which maybe this was a perfect example of why the tush-push should be banned. If it creates this kind of chaos, then maybe it's just not a good idea for football to have that. You could make the case of, even though we've argued that Georgia should use it, so we're on both sides of the issue, I reckon. But the point is, it was never a touchdown because the officials never went arms in the air. They went to it, they looked for it, and when they looked, trivia question, what did they find? The football wasn't there. And that's why it was a fumble. Because if you don't have the ball, you clearly fumbled. The question then becomes, okay, when did you fumble? No official in that situation I don't know the answer to that. So they go looking to find out. And when they went looking, what they discovered is the fumble began when C.J. Allen dislodged it. And once the fumble begins, Arnold does not have control going across the goal line because he never secured it at any point in time after that because he eventually lost it. And if it had rolled through the end zone, it would have been a touchback. Instead, it bounced back in the hands of Kyron Jones. Now, it was a misapplication of the process for Jones not to get a touchdown. That's part of the official error is that we see now they let these plays play out, and they should have been anticipating the possibility of a fumble so that when they go to find the football, they're looking around for it. In that particular case, they just messed up. They're going to probably say, because they can't say inadvertent whistle because there's a method for correcting an inadvertent whistle. They're going to say that Jones was down, but Jones' body was on top of an Auburn player, I believe. I don't think you're going to be able to say that Jones is down there. Jason Glossier's on the subject of why it wasn't a touchdown. Yeah, as we just were saying, I mean, that's just going to be, I think it's just improper game management on the part of the officials. They weren't anticipating the fumble, and so therefore they're just going to have said that the play was blown dead because Jones was down, even though technically Jones wasn't down. Jonathan Aaron says, how many more coaches do you think get fired? I think a lot. I think there are a lot of SEC coaches that are going to lose their job this year for all the reasons we talked about earlier in the SEC through. UJ Marine says he expects Kiffin to go quarterback run and quick passing game. Yeah, there'll be a lot of that. There'll be a lot of that probably for sure. Andrew Sisson says, how great do we have it as Dog fans? 5-1 despite our issues. Dogs have not peaked. In his opinion, he says, one game at a time, beat Ole Miss. Yeah, I mean, look, 5-1 through the first half of the regular season with a very manageable opportunity to duplicate that at least in the second half of the season, going 10-2. That puts you very much in the college football playoff conversation. I would say almost guarantees a playoff spot given the schedule that Georgia plays. Yeah, I mean, it's a real opportunity, and just celebrate the wins. I think Andrew is 100% right about that. Just enjoy the wins. Celebrate those wins because, man, it feels great. It feels great to be able to do that. Let's get a few more. Randall Thagard says, does Lane Kiffin go to Auburn? I mean, I'm guessing that Kiffin would like a bigger job than Ole Miss. I think done a lot at Ole Miss from a fundraising standpoint, something you maybe would have thought would have been harder to do. He's found a way to be successful with that, but it seems like the Ole Miss program in some respects probably has a bit of a ceiling. Other SEC programs don't have that. I don't know that Lane Kiffin is automatically an easy hire for every school to make for a good number of reasons, but I think that Kiffin's hire would get some scrutiny depending on where we're talking about, but also when it's all said and done, coaches go, programs want good coaches, and Kiffin certainly has the look of being one of those. Let me get a comment here from Cody Akins, I should say, who says it was the first punch that got the ball starting to come out. The second one came in as the nose was on the line and finished knocking it out, but it's where the ball started moving that matters. Yeah. If the Raylan Wilson punch does not happen, it's still a fumble. It's still a fumble. And Jackson Arnold was in the process of losing that ball. We'll watch it again here. Yeah, I mean, I just think that's pretty clear. So Wilson's knockout makes it easier for Kyron Jones to recover it. But Wilson's knockout does not cause the fumble. It's Auburn propaganda to say that it does. It's Auburn propaganda to say that it does. C.J. Allen starts the process of a fumble, and Wilson aided with Jones's recovery. The TV broadcast, and listen, while I don't do the same level of games that Sean McDonough does, I do broadcast games. And I can tell you that my biggest fear is something happening during a game that I can't explain, because that's what you're there to do. You're there to explain what's happening. And so, especially high school, because high school is sometimes kind of crazy, when something occurs that I can't explain, or the fear that it might, hopefully it never does, makes me very nervous. I can tell you that the regular broadcasters, even though they've got more help and whatever, they're the same way. So when you find an explanation, you latch onto it. So while we're all mad at Sean McDonough today, there is an element, as someone who at least has some familiarity with McDonough's job, where when a crazy thing happens, when you find an explanation that you can discuss with the audience, man, you grab it with both hands. And that's just what they did. They grabbed the Wilson part of this and say, we think the officials got it wrong because the Wilson dislodge occurred after the ball had crossed the plane. And if that was true, it would have been an Auburn touchdown. It would have been. But that's not true. And everything about the drama and the hysterics, and listen, McDonough, one of the things that makes him a good play-by-play man, and I do think he's a good play-by-play man, is he does do an emotional call. He does. And he's clearly very emotional in that. But their error was, in all the replays they watched, they just didn't see the C.J. Allen part of it. But the C.J. Allen part of it was the part of it, because in the stat sheet, he's the guy that's credited with it. And that happened prior to crossing the goal line. Spencer Clark says Arnold knew he lost the football from the exchange. Yeah. Auburn people are saying nobody claps like this. Nobody carries a football. Let me use my phone. You don't carry a football like this. It's already on its way out. It's the process of coming out is already beginning. And Auburn people are sharing this picture, this freeze frame they think is the smoking gun. They're proving our point. Because in the photo, you can see a fist where the football's supposed to be. And I really do think it's pretty simple. Just because it's close does not mean it's controversial. The millions of people who think this is controversial they've had an opinion handed to them by the broadcast media. And they don't know it. G. Gray said, we've answered this 1,000 times. Why didn't Georgia get a fumble recovery for a touchdown? Because the officials lost contain. The officials made an error. It should have been a Georgia touchdown. I'm guessing what they're going to say is that Kyron Jones was ruled down. because Kyron Jones was on top of a player. But we see this in college football sometimes. It doesn't happen a lot, where if you, on the process of going down, but if your body lands on a player and not on turf, then you just get right back up and keep on running. That's what should have been allowed to happen. But the officials did not know it was a fumble until they looked to the end zone and saw Jones standing there with the ball. So they just messed up. But the point we're all making is, so if there's anybody that should be mad, it should be Georgia fans, because that was a touchdown they should have gotten. Jonathan Era asked me if I saw the Stephen Hawking X Games video. Yes, I did see that, actually. Katie Lester also shouting out Peyton Woodring. Yeah, big field goal in the first half. Didn't miss one, but also made another big one too. And those were both crucial for Georgia. You're 100% right about that. 100% right about that. All right. One more. We got to go. And we've gone way too long. Let's see what else. Anything else? DT says Jimmy Sexton, the famous agent that represents a lot of these players, about to make a lot of money. He really is. But to go back to a point I was making during the actual broadcast, people think these large coaching salaries and these huge buyouts are foolish, but whatever it takes to secure a coach that might be great is clearly worth it, because the actual monetary value of a truly great coach is multiples, 10x, arguably, of what you pay him. And that means that if you've got to pay the big buyout to get the guy that you thought was great that turned out not to be, because you had to hire him in such a rush that you talked yourself into something that turns out not to be true, the buyout is also worth it too. It just is. That doubling down and then doubling down again and then doubling down again until you finally find a coach that's right for you, it's always worth it. It's just always worth it. It's a lot of money. It seems unseemly, but the dividends that you draw when you finally land the right guy, as we've lived through over the course of these last 9 years, is all 100% totally worth it. Zachary Stephen Cannon says Dabo's on the way out the door. Yeah, that's one that's in. I mean, look, most of y'all are on the same page with me, whether it be worn out welcome for Dabo. I mean, as many as 6 SEC coaches, maybe. I don't think that's too high of a number. We're going to have the craziest coaching carousel of all time. I mean, we can say a lot of things about college football, and some of it drives me crazy. Big Ten and with their, private equity money, things like that. But it finds a way to keep us entertained. Do y'all know what the next few months are going to be like? Georgia fighting and scratching, to hold on. Because here's the deal about Georgia. You may say they're beatable, but you still got to beat them if you want to eliminate them. So they're going to be in the mix. We've got total madness in terms of, who actually are the very best teams in college football right now? That's total madness. Then you roll into new portal window in January, coaching carousel that's just as aggressive as ever. It is about to be wild. Stick D's will finish with this. He says, was I near Kirby when he did his table dance? No, I did not see that in real time. I was still running to get down to the field, so I missed that in real time. I've seen the video, and I think it's great. And listen, I think that Kirby Smart, in this respect, is really, what's the word I'm looking for? We should emulate him in this respect. Kirby works hard and celebrates hard. I think that is such an attitude worth emulating. Like, when Kirby is at work, nobody's more serious about his work. And we should all aspire to be that way. I think that work is important. Work hard. And then when something good happens for you, get up on a table and celebrate. Like as serious as he is on the job, is as and I say this kindly, goofy as he is in his celebration. Like, dance like nobody's watching, celebrate like crazy. Like, what a great way to be. We should all be that way. We should all work as hard as we can and celebrate as hard as we can because life is short. I think that is really, really cool. And I was so happy to hear him. And we may get into later on this week some of the reasons why he talked about the meaning of that game for him. We may get into that. But the point is, work hard, play hard. Kirby Smart really has that figured out. And I think that's awesome. All right. Got to go. Back tomorrow. Y'all check out RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price promised. You can trust them for that, including, as I said, it's going to be winter here before you know it. Get your heating system tuned up to factory fresh specs. RS Andrews can help get you some new life out of that old heating unit because, who knows? I mean, somebody told you 3 years ago you need a new heating system and you figured out some way not to. Well, eventually you are going to need to replace it. But one more winter, RS Andrews may be able to show you how, and it may only cost you $99 to get it tuned back up to factory fresh specs. So check it out online, rsandrews.com. Back tomorrow, DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. By the way, special guest later on this week, too. We're looking forward to. I'll tell you more about that at some point. We'll see you then, everybody.